Some choices are made from hope. Others are made from dust and the empty feeling in your stomach. Jake's choice began with the sight of a banker nailing a piece of paper to his family's front door, a piece of paper that meant everything was gone. The Texas sun beat down on Jake's neck like a heavy, hot hand. He stood in the middle of his land, but it did not feel like his anymore. The dirt under his boots was cracked and dry. The small wooden house where he was born looked tired and sad. The air was silent. There were no cows lowing, no horses moving in the corral. There was only the sound of the wind whispering across the empty fields. That morning, a man from the bank in a clean suit had come. He did not look Jake in the eye. He just nailed a notice to the front door. The paper said the bank now owned this land. It said Jake had to leave by the end of the month. Jake had worked his whole life on this ranch, and now it was all over. He felt a hollow space open up inside him, a mix of fear and shame. He had no money. He had no family left to help him. He was completely alone. Later, in the town saloon, Jake sat at a table in the corner. He had just enough coins for one glass of beer. He held the cool glass, listening to the talk around him. Men laughed and talked about cows and weather and money. Their easy talk made Jake feel even worse. Then, he heard a name that made him look up. Two older ranchers at the next table were talking about Eleanor Vance. "Old Lady Vance up at Whiskey Ridge," one man said, shaking his head. "The Iron Dowager, they call her. Richer than anyone, but all alone in that big house." "Heard a rumor," his friend said, leaning in closer. "Heard she's lookin' for a husband. Not for love, mind you. She needs a young man, someone with a strong back and a decent face. Someone to leave her famous name to." The first man laughed. Who'd be desperate enough to marry that old battle-axe for her money? The words hung in the air. Jake felt his face get warm. He stared into his glass. The idea was crazy. Marry a stranger? A woman known for being cold and tough? It was a foolish thought. But then he pictured the banker's notice on his door. He pictured the empty corral and the dry fields. He had no choices left. This was not a choice made from hope. It was a choice made from having nothing left to lose. He finished his beer, the last of his money gone. He stood up, his decision made. He walked out of the saloon and toward the stable to get his horse. He was going to ride to Whiskey Ridge. He was going to meet Eleanor Vance. The road to Whiskey Ridge was long and dusty. With every step his horse took, Jake felt a little more of his pride fall away. He was not going to court a woman. He was going to ask for a job, a very strange job. He was going to ask to be a husband in name only. Finally, he saw it. The Vance Manor stood on a hill like a king overlooking its kingdom. It was not a friendly-looking place. It was a giant house of dark wood and stone, with too many windows that looked like dark eyes watching him. It seemed to suck up all the sunlight around it. He tied his horse to a post and walked to the heavy front door. He lifted the brass knocker and let it fall. The sound echoed inside like a gunshot. The door opened. A woman stood there, dressed in a severe black dress. Her hair was pulled back so tightly it looked painful. She did not smile. She looked him up and down, her eyes noting his worn boots and dusty clothes. "Yes," she said. Her voice was as cold as the water from a deep well. "My name is Jake," he said, trying to sound confident. "I'm here to see Mrs. Vance. About her proposal." The woman's eyes narrowed slightly. But she stepped aside. "Wait here," she said. Jake stood in the huge entrance hall. The ceiling was high above him. Portraits of serious-looking people stared down from the walls. The air smelled of old wood and lemon polish. It was the cleanest, quietest, and most lonely place he had ever been. After a few minutes, the woman returned. "She will see you. Follow me." She led him into a large library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling. And there, in a large chair by a cold fireplace, sat Eleanor Vance. She was not what he expected. She was not a frail old woman. She sat straight and tall. Her hair was silver and pulled back neatly. She wore a simple, dark dress. Her hands, resting on the arms of the chair, were thin but looked strong. Her eyes were the color of granite, and they looked right through him. She was not pretty, but she was powerful. You could feel it in the room. "So," she said. Her voice was clear and sharp. "You are the young man who has come about my advertisement." Jake swallowed. "Yes, ma'am. I am Eleanor Vance. You may have heard stories. Most of them are true." She did not ask him to sit. "I need a husband. I need a man who is presentable. Someone to carry on the Vance name after I am gone. This is a business arrangement. Do you understand?" Jake nodded, his throat dry. "In return," she continued, "you will have a roof over your head, food on your table, and a monthly allowance. When I die, you will inherit the title to this land and the house. The money will be enough to live comfortably. That is the offer." She looked at him, waiting. She was not asking for love. She was not even asking for liking. She was offering a trade. His freedom and his name for security. Jake thought of his empty ranch. He thought of the banker's notice. He had no other offers. "I accept," he said, the words feeling heavy in his mouth. "Good," she said, with no emotion. "The wedding will be tomorrow. It will be here. There will be no guests." She turned to the woman in black. "Mrs. Abbott, show him to his room. He will stay here now." And just like that, it was done. As he followed Mrs. Abbott up the grand staircase, Eleanor Vance spoke again. "One rule, Jake," she said. He turned. She was still sitting in her chair, a small, strong figure in the big room. She pointed a finger toward the north. "The North Pastureland is not part of our agreement. It is managed separately. You are never to go there. Never cross the gate. Is that understood?" Her voice left no room for argument. "Yes, ma'am," Jake said. He followed Mrs. Abbott down a long hallway. She opened a door to a large bedroom. It was fancy, but cold and unused. "This is your room," she said, her voice flat. She left him there alone. Jake walked to the window. He looked out over the vast ranch. His ranch now, in a way. But it felt like a golden cage. And far in the distance, he could see a line of trees and a tall, dark fence. The forbidden North Pasture. He wondered what was so important that it needed its own rule. Life at Whiskey Ridge was strange and quiet. Jake felt like a ghost in someone else's house. His marriage to Eleanor Vance lasted 10 minutes. A judge came to the house. They said their vows in the cold library. Mrs. Abbott and the cook were the only witnesses. No one smiled. Eleanor put a plain gold ring on his finger. It felt cold. When the judge said Jake could kiss his bride, Eleanor turned her cheek. The kiss landed on skin that felt like paper. After that, he barely saw her. They ate meals together in a huge dining room, but they were served by a silent Mrs. Abbott. The only sound was the clinking of knives and forks. Eleanor would ask him simple questions about his past. She seemed to be checking his story, making sure he was who he said he was. She never talked about herself. The house was full of people, but it felt empty. The few ranch hands tipped their hats to him but never talked. Mrs. Abbott watched him constantly, her eyes judging him. He knew the staff thought he was a gold digger. He knew they were loyal only to Eleanor. To pass the time, Jake walked the land. He was the master of the ranch, so no one stopped him. He saw the barns, the corrals, the fields. It was a huge operation, but it felt quiet. There were cattle, but not the great herds the stories told of. Where was the famous Vance wealth? It wasn't in the house. It wasn't in the land he could see. He found himself drawn to the main house's hallway. Portraits of the Vance family hung there. The largest was of a handsome, smiling man with kind eyes. Eleanor's husband, he guessed. The man looked full of life. Jake wondered how he had died. The story was a riding accident, but the house felt too sad for something so simple. Most of all, his eyes were drawn to the north. From the highest window in the house, he could see over the trees. He could see that special fence. It was strong and tall, much stronger than any normal pasture fence. It had a heavy gate with a big lock. What was so valuable back there that it needed a lock like that? 10 days after the wedding, Jake came down for breakfast. Eleanor was not there. This was unusual. She was always there first. Mrs. Abbott came into the room. Her face was pale and tight. Her hands were clasped in front of her. "Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was strangely formal. "I am sorry to tell you, Mrs. Vance, she passed away in her sleep last night." Jake stood frozen. The news was a shock. He felt a confusing mix of feelings. Sadness for a woman he didn't know. Fear for what would happen now. And a guilty, hopeful thought about the inheritance. Before he could say anything, Mrs. Abbott spoke again. "The lawyer from town is on his way. He has the will." Jake just nodded. His new life had ended almost before it began. And now, everything was about to change. The house felt different after Eleanor died. The quiet was no longer just empty. It was heavy, like a blanket smothering everything. The portraits on the wall seemed to watch Jake with accusing eyes. He stayed in his room, waiting for the lawyer, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He was sad she was gone, but he could not help the hope that bubbled up inside him. He was free. And he was rich. The lawyer arrived in the afternoon. He was a small man with spectacles and a serious manner. He carried a black leather bag. Mrs. Abbott showed him into the library, the same room where Jake had gotten married just 10 days before. It felt like a lifetime ago. Jake sat in one chair. The lawyer sat in another, opening his bag on the small table between them. Mrs. Abbott stood near the door, her hands folded, her face a mask of stone. "My condolences for your loss, Mr. Vance," the lawyer said, not sounding very sorry. He pulled out a thick document. "We will now review the last will and testament of Eleanor Vance." Jake sat up straight, trying to look like a respectful husband and a responsible heir. The lawyer read through many boring words. Then he got to the important part. "I leave my entire estate, including the house, all land, and all assets, to my husband, Jake Vance." Jake's heart leaped. This was it. This was everything he had wanted. But the lawyer kept reading. "The funds in my bank account are to be used solely for the upkeep and maintenance of the estate. A monthly allowance will be provided to Jake Vance for his personal needs." Jake's smile faded slightly. The money was in an account for the house? Not for him. That was odd. The lawyer adjusted his glasses. "The core of the estate's value, and its most important duty, is tied to the assets contained within the Northern Valley. This is referred to in this document as the Warden's duty. Jake Vance, as the heir, is now the Warden. He must protect the stock in the North Valley at all costs. This is a sacred trust of the Vance family." Jake stared, completely confused. The Warden's duty? Protect the stock. What did that mean? He thought of the locked gate. Was her fortune a secret herd of super valuable cattle back there? Then the lawyer said the worst thing. "It is also my duty to inform you that the Blackwood Railroad Company has expressed interest in purchasing the North Valley land. They will likely contact you with an offer now that Mrs. Vance is no longer here to refuse them." The meeting ended. The lawyer packed his papers, shook Jake's hand, and left. Jake stood alone in the library. He was the owner of a giant house. He was the owner of a huge amount of land. But he had almost no cash of his own. His entire inheritance was a confusing job title, the Warden, and a bunch of cows behind a locked fence. The famous Vance wealth was a myth. He felt cheated. He felt lost. The golden cage was still a cage, and now he was in it alone. For 2 days, Jake wandered the house like a lost soul. He was the boss, but he felt like a prisoner. The staff ignored him more than ever. Mrs. Abbott looked at him with something like pity, which was worse than anger. He had to know. He had to see what was in the North Valley. What was so important that it was his sacred duty to protect? What was worth more than money to Eleanor Vance? He knew only one person on the ranch might talk to him, the old ranch hand, Amos. He was the one who sometimes drove Eleanor in her wagon. He was a man of few words, with a face like worn leather. Jake found Amos fixing a harness in the barn. The old man looked up as Jake approached. "Amos," Jake began, his voice sounding too loud in the quiet barn. "The will. It talked about the North Valley. The warden's duty." Amos stopped working. He looked at Jake for a long time, his eyes narrowed. "Did it now?" he said, his voice a low rumble. "I need to see it," Jake said. "I'm the warden now. I need to know what I'm protecting." Amos shook his head slowly. "Mrs. Vance said never. She said it was too important." "Mrs. Vance is gone," Jake said, his frustration bursting out. "She left it to me. How can I protect it if I don't even know what it is?" Amos sighed a deep, tired sigh. He looked toward the north. He seemed to be having a battle inside himself. Finally, he nodded. "All right," he grumbled. "But you brace yourself, son. You ain't seen nothing like this." My heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement, Jake followed Amos as he hitched 2 horses to a small wagon. They drove away from the main house, toward the line of trees. The tall, locked gate came into view. Amos took a large, rusty key from his pocket. It looked very old. He unlocked the heavy lock and pushed the gate open. The sound of the creaking hinges seemed to scream into the quiet afternoon. They passed through the gate, and Amos locked it behind them. The path ahead was overgrown. The air began to change. It grew warmer, damper. It smelled different here, green and alive. The trees thinned, and the wagon rolled into a hidden valley. A mist lay on the ground. Strange plants grew everywhere. And then, Jake saw them. At first, his brain could not understand what his eyes were showing him. They were big. Much bigger than cows. They had thick, shaggy fur like a buffalo. But they had enormous antlers, wider than the wagon he was sitting in. They were like something from a dream. From a history book. They were creatures that should not exist. One of the giant animals lifted its head from where it was grazing on the strange silver grass. It looked at the wagon with calm, ancient eyes. It was not afraid. Jake's mouth hung open. He could not speak. He could not breathe. Amos looked at Jake's shocked face. "Megaloceros," he said softly. "Giant elk. Everyone thinks they disappeared ages ago. But they didn't. They're here. This is the Vance legacy. This is what you're the warden of. This is what Eleanor gave her life to protect." Jake's dream of money vanished like smoke. He was not rich. He was something else entirely. He was the keeper of a miracle. And he understood, with a sinking heart, that this secret was more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. Jake sat on the wagon bench, unable to move. He just stared at the giant creatures moving peacefully through the misty valley. The sight was so huge, so impossible, it made his own problems seem very small. His dream of a bag of gold felt silly now. How could you put a price on this? Amos let him look for a long time. He understood. Finally, he clicked the reins and turned the wagon around. "Best be getting back," he said quietly. The ride back to the main ranch was silent. Jake's mind was racing, but it was a different kind of race. It wasn't about how to get money. It was about how to understand what he had just seen. He thought of Eleanor's serious face, her warning about the North Gate. He finally understood her. She wasn't just a strict old woman. She was a guardian. She had given her life to hide a beautiful, fragile secret. When they got to the barn, Jake turned to Amos. "What do I need to do?" he asked. His voice was different. The whine of disappointment was gone. It was steady now. A flicker of respect showed in Amos's eyes. He nodded. "All right, Warden. I'll show you." For the next few days, Jake's life found a new purpose. Under Amos's watchful eye, he learned the routine. He learned how to mix the special minerals into the salt licks the giant elk needed. He learned which of the strange valley plants were safe for them to eat and which were not. He learned how to check the strong fence for any weak spots without disturbing the herd. He started going to the valley every day. At first, the giant elk would watch him from a distance. But slowly, they grew used to him. They saw he meant no harm. He was just the new two-legged creature who brought food and checked the water. One afternoon, as he was fixing a part of the fence, he found something. Carved into the wood of a post, very small, were the initials EV, next to a smaller heart with the letters TV inside. Eleanor Vance. And her husband, Thomas Vance. Jake ran his fingers over the carving. He suddenly saw Eleanor not as a rich baroness, but as a young woman in love, helping her husband protect his amazing discovery. This was their life's work. Their love story was written in this hidden valley, not in the big, cold house. Jake's heart felt heavy, but in a good way. He wanted to do right by them. His new peace was broken when a fancy black carriage rolled up to the house. A man in a city suit stepped out. He was from the Blackwood Railroad Company. "Mr. Vance," the man said, smiling a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "So sorry for your loss. We're here to make you a very generous offer for that troublesome North Valley land. A sum of money that would set you up for life." Jake looked at the man. He thought of the giant elk. He thought of Eleanor's carving. He thought of the sacred duty he had almost thrown away. "The land is not for sale," Jake said, his voice firm. The man's smile vanished. "Think carefully, son. That is worthless land. This is a lot of money." "I said no," Jake repeated. "The answer will not change." The man looked at him coldly, nodded, and got back in his carriage. As it rolled away, Jake knew it was not over. He had just started a fight. The man from Blackwood was true to his word. The very next day, the trouble started. Jake was in town buying supplies. He could feel people looking at him differently. Where before they were curious, now their looks were cold. A woman he knew pulled her child closer as he walked by. At the general store, the owner was suddenly less friendly. "Heard you turned down Blackwood's offer," the store owner said, not meeting Jake's eyes. "Heard you're being mighty difficult. That you might be unstable. Grief can do that to a man." Jake's face grew hot. Blackwood was spreading lies about him. They were trying to turn the town against him, to make him seem like a crazy person who didn't know what was good for him. When he got back to Whiskey Ridge, Amos was waiting for him, his face grim. "They were here," Amos said. "Blackwood men. On the ridge overlooking the North Valley with looking glasses. They were scouting the land." A cold fear trickled down Jake's spine. They were getting too close. That night, he and Amos sat at the kitchen table. The rest of the house was asleep. "Amos," Jake said quietly, "how did Eleanor's husband really die?" Amos looked old and tired. He stared into his cup of coffee. "It was no riding accident," he said, his voice low. "Mr. Vance, Thomas, he was a good man. He loved those creatures like they were his children. Blackwood wanted the land for their train line back then, too. They offered him money. He refused." Amos took a shaky breath. One day, he was out checking the fence. He never came back. They found him and his horse at the bottom of a ravine. But his saddle. Amos looked up, his eyes fierce. His saddle strap was cut. Almost all the way through. It was made to look like an accident. Jake felt the blood drain from his face. He wasn't just dealing with a pushy company. He was dealing with criminals. People who had already killed once to get that land. The secret of the valley was no longer just a beautiful burden. It was a dangerous one. He wasn't just protecting the elk from being discovered. He was protecting them from men who would destroy them and anyone who stood in their way. The fight was no longer about money. It was about life and death. The air at Whiskey Ridge grew thick with tension. It felt like the quiet moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Jake knew Blackwood would not just go away. After Amos's story about Thomas Vance, he understood the kind of men he was dealing with. He had to be ready. He called the few ranch hands together. They stood in the yard, hats in their hands, looking nervous. Mrs. Abbott and the cook watched from the kitchen doorway. "Men," Jake said, trying to sound like he knew what he was doing. "There's trouble coming. The Blackwood Company wants our North Valley, and they're going to try to take it. I won't let them. But I can't do it alone." He looked at their unsure faces. They owed him nothing. He was a stranger who had married the boss. Then, old Amos stepped forward. He stood next to Jake. "I stood with Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice rough but strong. "And I stand with her husband now. This is Vance land. We protect it." One by one, the other men nodded. Mrs. Abbott, to Jake's surprise, called out from the door, "The house is strong. We can make it stronger." Even the cook, a large woman named Bess, picked up a heavy iron skillet and said, "No one's both Aaron, my kitchen." A feeling Jake had never felt before warmed his chest. They were with him. He was not alone. They got to work. They moved wagons to block the main driveway. They brought extra water and food into the house from the spring house. They made sure every window was shuttered tight. Jake taught them how to use the ranch's hunting rifles, not to hurt anyone, but to fire warning shots if they had to. 2 days later, the siege began. A group of men on horses rode up to the main gate. They were not cowboys. They were rough-looking men, hired for a fight. Their leader, a man with a mean look in his eye, shouted for Jake to come out. Jake stood on the porch, a rifle held loosely in his hands, but ready. Amos stood on one side of him, and Mrs. Abbott, her arms crossed, stood on the other. "The land isn't for sale," Jake called out. "You're trespassing. Leave now." The leader laughed. "You're one man against all of us, boy. Be smart. Take the money." "The answer is no," Jake said, his voice not shaking. For a week, it was a waiting game. The men did not rush the house. Instead, they tried to starve them out. They set up camp just outside the property line, watching. They followed any ranch hand who tried to leave, scaring them back to the house. One afternoon, Amos had an idea. "They're watching us," he said. "So let's give 'em something to watch." He took 2 of the younger hands and they rode out, making a big show of checking fences on the opposite side of the ranch, far from the North Valley. The Blackwood men took the bait. Most of them rode after Amos, thinking he was leading them to something important. It was a trick. While they were gone, Jake and the others worked quickly to bring more supplies from the outer barns into the main house. They were playing a game of chess, and Jake was learning how to be a good player. But the game turned scary when Amos and the hands came galloping back late that evening. Amos was pale, and he was holding his arm. There was blood on his sleeve. "They got too close," he gasped, as Bess helped him into a chair and started to clean the cut. "One of them got a shot off. It's just a scratch. But they're gettin' bold, Jake. They're not gonna wait much longer." Jake looked at the brave old man, hurt protecting his home. The fear inside him turned into something hard and strong. This was his home. These were his people. And he would not let them down. That night, a wild storm blew in. The wind howled around the house like an angry spirit. Rain lashed against the shutters. It was the perfect cover. Jake knew they couldn't win a straight fight. There were too many Blackwood men. He had to be smarter. He had to use their greed and their fear against them. He had a plan. It was dangerous, but it was the only way. He waited until the storm was at its worst. Then, he put on his slicker and slipped out the back door. The wind and rain hit him as he ran to the barn. He didn't saddle his horse. The animal would be too nervous in the storm. He went on foot, moving through the sheets of rain toward the Blackwood camp. He could see the glow of their campfire through the trees, a blurry orange smudge in the stormy dark. He circled around until he found what he was looking for, the leader of the men, standing under a makeshift shelter, trying to stay dry. Jake stepped out of the shadows. The man jumped, his hand going to his gun. "Don't shoot," Jake yelled over the wind. "I'm alone. I've changed my mind." The leader lowered his gun, a nasty smile on his face. "Finally came to your senses, did you?" "I'll show you," Jake said, pretending to be scared and defeated. "I'll show you what's in the valley. Then you'll understand why I need more money. A lot more. It's not what you think." The greed in the man's eyes was bright even in the dark. He called 2 of his men, and they followed Jake as he led them through the storm toward the north gate. The wind screamed around them. The trees thrashed wildly. It felt like the whole world was angry. Jake's heart was pounding in his chest. This was the biggest gamble of his life. He unlocked the heavy gate and pushed it open. The valley inside was shrouded in mist and rain, looking even more mysterious and strange. "Well," the leader shouted. "What is it? Where are these valuable assets?" Jake pointed into the mist. "There," he said. Just then, the wind tore a hole in the mist. For one single breathless moment, the clouds parted and a flash of lightning lit up the valley. And they saw them. The giant forms of the megaloceros stood like ancient statues in the silver rain. Their huge antlers seemed to touch the sky. One of them turned its great head, and its eyes glowed in the lightning flash. They did not look like animals. In that second, they looked like ghosts, like monsters from another time. The Blackwood men froze. Their mouths hung open. The leader's face went from greedy to confused, then to pure, terrified disbelief. What are those things?" one man stammered, taking a step back. "That's the stock," Jake said, his voice low and serious. "That's the Vance legacy. It's protected. Cursed, some say. Everyone who has tried to take this land has come to a bad end." Another bolt of lightning crashed, making them all jump. The giant elk, startled by the noise, moved deeper into the mist, their shapes fading until they were just shadows again. The leader stared into the empty mist, his face white with fear. He wasn't a businessman anymore. He was a superstitious man faced with something he could not understand. "This place ain't right," he whispered. He turned and looked at Jake with wide, frightened eyes. "You can keep your cursed valley." He turned and ran back through the gate, his 2 men scrambling after him. Jake stood alone in the rain, listening to the sound of their terrified footsteps fading into the storm. He had done it. He had saved them. Not with a gun, but with a secret. He slowly closed the gate and locked it tight, keeping the miracle safe inside. He was the warden. And he had done his duty. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world washed clean and quiet. The Blackwood men were gone. When Jake sent a hand to check their camp, he found it abandoned. Empty cans and cold ashes were all that remained. It seemed they had packed up in the middle of the night and left in a mighty hurry, not even waiting for the rain to stop. The valley's secret, and the fear it inspired, had been a shield stronger than any wall. A deep peace settled over Whiskey Ridge. The anxious feeling that had hung in the air for weeks was gone. The sun seemed to shine a little brighter on the old house. Jake walked through his home, and for the first time, it truly felt like his. He wasn't a guest anymore. He wasn't an imposter. He was the master of the house. He went into the library and sat in the large chair by the fireplace, the one Eleanor had always used. It didn't feel wrong. It felt right. Mrs. Abbott brought him a cup of coffee. She didn't just set it down and leave. She paused. "It's quiet without them lurking about," she said. It was the closest she would ever come to saying, "Thank you," or, "Well done." But Jake understood. He nodded. "Yes, it is," he said. "We can get back to work now." Later, he walked out to the barn where Amos was brushing down a horse. The old man's arm was in a sling, but he was smiling. "Heard our visitors left in a rush," Amos said, a twinkle in his eye. "They did," Jake replied. "They decided they didn't like the weather." Amos chuckled, a warm, raspy sound. "I reckon that's one way to put it." Jake felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the sun. He had earned Amos's respect. He had earned the loyalty of his hands. He had protected his home. In the days that followed, a letter arrived from the Blackwood Railroad Company. It was very short and very formal. It stated that they were withdrawing all offers for the North Valley land and would no longer be pursuing any business with the Whiskey Ridge estate. Jake read it and smiled. He folded the letter and put it in a drawer. The war was over. One afternoon, he prepared for his now daily ride. He saddled his horse and loaded a sack with the special salt licks the giant elk needed. He rode toward the north gate with a feeling of happiness, not worry. He unlocked the gate and rode through, closing it carefully behind him. The hidden valley was beautiful in the afternoon light. The mist had burned away, and the strange plants glowed green. The herd of megaloceros was grazing peacefully. They lifted their magnificent heads as he approached, but they did not run. They knew him now. He was the bringer of salt, the fixer of fences, the quiet friend. Jake got off his horse and let it graze. He took a salt lick from his bag and walked slowly toward the herd. The largest elk, the one with the widest antlers, took a few steps toward him. It stopped a few feet away, its dark, intelligent eyes watching him. Jake's heart was full. He thought of the desperate man he had been just a few months ago, ready to marry a stranger for money. That man was gone. He had been reshaped by the love of a husband and wife he never knew, by the loyalty of people he had to earn, and by the wonder of these ancient, gentle creatures. He was not Jake, the poor cowboy anymore. He was Jake Vance, the warden of Whiskey Ridge. He had not found a fortune of gold. He had found something much better, a purpose, a home, and a family. He held out the salt lick. The giant elk dipped its head and gently took it from his hand. Its breath was warm against his skin. Jake reached out and slowly, carefully, placed his hand on the animal's shaggy neck. It stood still, accepting his touch. In that quiet moment, surrounded by miracles, Jake knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. Did you enjoy following Jake's journey from a desperate cowboy to the brave warden of Whiskey Ridge? If you felt excited, surprised, or happy for him, please let me know by leaving a like. If you'd like to read more stories like this, be sure to subscribe for future adventures. Thank you for listening.